Welcome to The World Awaits.
Travel tales to inspire your wanderlust.
I'm Kirsty Bedford, journalist, editor and travel writer.
And I'm Belinda Jackson, author, travel journalist and columnist, and we're your weekly co-hosts. Welcome back to The World Awaits. How are you all?
Hi everyone, how was your week, Belle?
It's been an interesting one. I'm back up in Sydney this week as we go to air, doing some briefings about travelling in lovely Peru. Remember, we had Sol Campos de Paris on the podcast recently, and she was talking about hiking to Machu Picchu. And then a few episodes before that, we had Chef Alejandro Saravia talking about the joys of ceviche and pisco sours. Yeah, so good. So to give myself a Peruvian refresher, I actually had dinner at his Sydney restaurant, Marina. He has another one here in Melbourne, as well as Farmer's Daughters. So it has been fabulous to have a little South American hit. That's been my week. What about yours, Kirsty?
Yes, good week. Getting back into routine after that travel event that we mentioned last week. Head on back and have a listen if you didn't hear about that. And I was really interested this week to see the response to New Zealand's new tourism campaign. So they've got this new campaign to lure Aussies to across the ditch. And the tagline is, for anyone who hasn't heard it, everyone must go. And the backlash has been global. So it was been labelled as tone deaf for sounding like a clearance sale. And the campaign was actually launched by the New Zealand government because Australian tourism numbers to New Zealand haven't yet bounced back from the pandemic. So the Prime Minister says despite that, he's saying that there are 4 million Aussies with New Zealand on their bucket list. So they wanted to come up with something that they thought would encourage Aussies to go, hence the word
to go. But the feedback has been brutal. CNN reported that the $500,000 campaign has sparked ridicule and quoted opposition politicians like Labor's Barbara Edmonds, who said that, quote, New Zealanders are voting with their feet, living in record high numbers, just as the government begins to focus on marketing to Australians. And the BBC also talked about how it's caused a lot of controversy, how there's a record unemployment, and saying some of them think that the campaign, everyone must go, I guess they're thinking everyone must go to the loo. I guess at least it's getting traction, right? What do you think as a Kiwi, Kirsty?
Yeah, look, obviously from a pure marketing perspective, it's definitely reached a pretty wide audience, global audience. But I do think they should just stick to what they do well. So actually, 25 years ago when I worked for Tourism New Zealand, that was when the idea was first raised to use the Lord of the Rings as a way to lure tourists. It was an idea actually of my boss at the time, a remarkable woman called Jane Dent, who had also been the PR for the All Blacks. And prior to that, she was a television journalist, presenter actually, a news presenter. And she'd come on board and had this idea because she really got film and she saw what it could do. So we went to work on the biggest project ever undertaken by Tourism New Zealand, which was hosting media around the world premiere of the Lord of the Rings Return of the King. An incredible project to be involved in. And it really put New Zealand on the global map. So that was a campaign under the 100% Pure New Zealand campaign because obviously of the stunning landscapes and the movie showed. So if you've ever seen those films, I'm sure most people have, they did just show the most incredible landscapes of New Zealand, but all across, and it was actually filmed all across New Zealand too, from the north to the South Island. But the most spectacular scenery was definitely those sort of mountain peaks around Queenstown area.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone's heard about that 100% Pure New Zealand campaign. And of course, New Zealand is Middle Earth. I'm a raging Lord of the Rings nerd, so it really sang to me. Look, we can bash Tourism New Zealand about this, but Australia has had some absolute stinker ad campaigns as well. Do you remember that awful one that Tourism Australia did when Scott Morrison was ahead of the department back in 2006? That was Lara Bingle. Worst campaign ever. And it was tone deaf, like most of Morrison's decisions and statements. And we were slaughtered on a global scale for that one, like what New Zealand is enduring at the moment. So I don't know. We're probably still best known for one of the oldest, which was Paul Hogan chucking a shrimp on the barbie, which does feel a little bit cringy now. and this is going to date me, I was in San Francisco after the ad came out, and I was asked several times about how I could cope with such macho Aussie men. But really is a cultural icon, don't you think?
Yeah, most definitely. And much like New Zealand's latest campaign, it did generate widespread reach and got eyeballs onto us on Australia. So tick for that. I think another one which is really interesting to mention, which is actually very good, is Switzerland do a really good job too. So they engage Roger Federer to promote his homeland, and they've got some really fun videos, including the latest one, which is with South African comedian Trevor Noah.
Yeah, that one was actually really funny. I was a judge last year on the best tourism ads for 2024. It's a competition that's been run by the International Committee of Tourism Film Festivals. And Switzerland was the standout, not least because of Federer, because he's so dry. He's so sweet as well. He's talking about trains and efficiency and stuff like that, which is his undoing. It is worth going back and having a look at that one, at how it done well. We'll put a link in the show notes so that you can reminisce about all these campaigns. And we'd love to hear your thoughts about what tourism campaigns have inspired you to travel. Just drop us a note at hello@theworldawaits.au.
This week, we're waltzing off to the Austrian capital, Vienna, where Belle is recently back from. Belle, let's start by telling us, do you think it really lives up to the world's most livable city?
It usually rivals Melbourne for that one. But I've got to say, it's a small city, it's a walkable city, it's got a huge concentration of attractions. It's well laid out. I think it's Vienna is just it just works. It's a whole lot smaller, like it's a whole lot, so it's half the size population wise of Melbourne. Yet of course it's incredible transport network. And then you land at Vienna airport, you're like, oh my gosh, there is not one but two train options from the airport. So the ADV sticks in first at right at the very beginning when you first touch down. And I just think, and it's really beautiful. It has centuries of history in there. And I can see why it is one of the top most visited cities at the moment. It's just got it all going on. It's got cafe culture, it's got the art culture, it's compact and it's just beautiful. It really is beautiful.
And what's the vibe? Because the big thing is we can all talk about places, everyone talks about places they went, but it's really how they make you feel. So how does it make you feel when you're there? What's the vibe? It's got so much history. Is that sort of what you feel when you're walking around? Just that sort of the history and the culture? Are you feeling that sort of vibe?
I think that it always feels like something's happening in Vienna, like from first thing in the morning. And I've got to say, look, coffee is a bit of a life changer for me. But people are waiting. I was there in one of the peak seasons, which is that period from Christmas till New Year, because not only I was there visiting family, but then, of course, all of Europe is going to visit everywhere else as well. It's a really busy time to be in the city. But people will be waiting to get into cafes as early as 8 o'clock in the morning. There's a cafe called Vienna is very famous for its cafe scene. There's a cafe called Cafe Central. 8 o'clock in the morning, people are queuing to go in there and drink coffee, but it's also intensely Instagrammable. So Instagram really has taken off in the cities. You have to book your slot to go in there and sip your coffee with that perfect arched background behind you.
You say, because what they do is it's obviously about sitting down together and drinking and eating, and that's something that they clearly do very well and comparable to us trying to get a takeaway coffee and rush off with it. And you'd also told me that in Vienna people eat sausages on the street in their opera gowns. So what's that all about?
I'll tell you all about it. Let me backtrack to the cafe thing. The difference, yes, exactly. They're not just grabbing a takeaway. The difference is you can sit in a cafe in Vienna at any time of day or evening and just never move. You can just stay there for an hour or two over the one cup of coffee is perfectly acceptable because you might be reading their newspapers, which in the traditional cafes they have on slats. You pull out the newspaper and you sit there for an hour or two just reading. But also they're very beautiful and the staff are in those traditional cafes in their black and whites with their long aprons serving, and they're more like a host of a nightclub or something like that. They just make those cafes work. They've almost been a victim of social media. So if you went to somewhere like Cafe Central, yes, it is very beautiful. But if you wanted to have that experience without waiting for an hour and a half in the snow, I was like, people, are you insane? Really? I would suggest you would go to the Gloriette, which is the cafe at the top of Schönbrunn Palace, which was built as a breakfast room for the emperor, and now it's one of the most gorgeous cafes, and also in the art galleries as well. And my hot tip then too is the Obla Cafe Domea, which is near Schönbrunn Palace. And that's a really Viennese scene. Um, can I just add though, look, I'm a total flat whiter. Did not take to the melange, which is the coffee that they drink almost like a filter coffee. It really doesn't hit the spot. So there is a wave of new cafes. And actually number 3 in the world was just named as the number 3 best cafe in the world was just named a couple of weeks ago, which is in Vienna, called Gotha, Gota, Coffee Experts, in the inaugural 100 best coffee shops in the world. So there is that third wave of coffee. Mind you are paying like €4.50 for a cup of coffee. So if you put that back, it's about nearly $8. So
What you do if you're earning euro, it's no different to here, really, is it? I can pay $7.50 for a chai latte.
yeah, that's the point. So sit down, savor it because you are paying for it
That's
as
it.
well. And yeah, and the whole of Vienna is really just governed by people drinking coffee, eating gorgeous pastries. When you jump in a train, everyone's got a little hot bag of deliciousness that they go with them. So they've really got that sense of how to live at the current time.
Love it. Back to the sausages.
Sausages, sausages. So actually, this is the antithesis of the cafe because what you'll see is these Wurzel stands everywhere, these sausage stands all over the city. And the most famous one is just beside the Opera House. And a Viennese matron told me that she would always go, it's such a thing. You go to the opera and then on the way home, you grab a sausage at one of these sausage stands and you eat it just standing there in your sausage gown. And then you jump.
Isn't that a bit like seeing a bride smoke a cigarette?
It's a little bit like that, but those sausage stands are so famous. They're so iconic. A Viennese friend of mine calls them the Habsburg fast food. But the sausages are so good. We're not like talking dirty Bunnings bangers here, but really good solid sausages. And you might have them with mustard and tomato sauce or
The feminist in me loves seeing people in opera getting
chomping on it. Absolutely. With a beer or a little shot of liqueur there with a holdout. It's so stylish. I've got to say, I ate a lot of sausages this time around in Vienna. And it's just one of those cultural things that you do. Some places, like around the Opera House now, are outrageously touristy, but then you'll find them at the tram stops and places like that. So you can jump in and have your little sausage hit, and you really feel like you're just part of a very local scene when you're doing that.
Yeah. And back to more traditional culture, when you were there was some pretty significant anniversaries, right? So what did you do to celebrate those?
This year, actually, 2025 is the year to visit Austria if you've got it on your hit list. There's 2 really big anniversaries in Austria. So in Vienna itself, it is 200 years since the birth of Johann Strauss, the son, who's the guy that composed the Blue Danube Waltz. So it's interesting. His father was a composer as well. And he became the waltz king. And waltzing was quite scandalous at the time because couples would be smooshed close together and then they'd go in this dizzying whirl and you would forget about the world around you. Before that, it's quite interesting that for most dancers, you either stayed very far apart or you changed partners all the time. So now suddenly you're squished close together and you're with the same man that you're dancing with the entire waltz and you're very up close and personal. So it was quite a change in how people danced. So that's being celebrated all over Vienna this year. There's a couple of new museums. There's one called the New Dimensions in the center of the city, which is a fantastic interactive museum. And then there's another, you can actually go up to, there's another place called the House of Strauss, which is where, he was from a musical family, so his father and his brothers were composers as well. And you can go and sit in a concert in one of the halls where the Strauss family actually used to perform. So these are beautiful places just glittering with glass and bright colors. And you can see the pianos that they would compose on. And so all over the city for the whole year, are these gorgeous exhibitions that are happening, like in the Vienna Museum in the center of town. You can see the scores that Strauss actually wrote for some of the operettas. And he's a bit of a saucy fellow. He married women of questionable reputations and many children as well. And he had several marriages too. And then you dig back through his history as well to find that the Nazi Party had adopted a lot of his work and expunged his Jewish history. And all of that sort of thing is coming to light now. So I think that these are really fascinating museums if you've got a chance to be in Vienna at this time. One of the great things about Vienna is its proximity to everywhere and its incredible train network system. So my suggestion if you're in town is to jump on a train 2.5 hours away to Salzburg, which is the birthplace of Mozart. And the other reason why it's famous is that this is where The Sound of Music was filmed. And this is the 60th anniversary of the movie, The Sound of Music. Can I just say, I have never met an Austrian, and I did a lot of vox popping this time in Vienna, asking people had they ever seen The Sound of Music. And around every single person said no, except one who said they were forced to watch it by their Australian husband and fell asleep halfway through because it was so boring. So I've never met an Austrian that's actually watched The Sound of Music, which is quite interesting. And one suggestion might be that it was dealing with some pretty heavy stuff at the time about the rise of Nazism in Austria and Germany. These were pretty heavy themes for a movie to come out 60 years ago. A lot of people didn't want to think about it. Also, the fact that I don't think there were, definitely none of the leads were actually Austrian either. So people were like, are we really going to go and watch Julie Andrews running around the hills of Salzburg? However, for people like us, especially Australians, love it, love the musical. You've got new museums opening. You can go take a Sound of Music tour when you're there. If you're just walking around the city yourself, which you can actually walk up to the nunnery where Maria was a novice at the time, which is gorgeously atmospheric. Like you're hiking up the sides of really steep stone stairwells going up to these monasteries and nunneries for incredible views over Salzburg. So you, like Kirsty, you would get your step count in if you were doing this one.
There you go. And look, and I have to ask you, getting back to Vienna, we're on the train back to Vienna now. And so I have to ask you, because you went around the Christmas period, did the markets really live up to their name?
I have to say, I think that Vienna is totally on trend with the coolcation, the idea of going to a cold place as opposed to lying on the beach. I was skeptical. I was like, how much can you do a Christmas market? And the answer is, they are fantastic. Like you literally have public license to walk around with a giant mug of hot wine, like in a public place. And I cannot see it. A day what the markets are selling. Just drink the wine. You can do that. But the great thing is they have an alcohol-free version, which is brilliant too. So just in case you thought that 12 o'clock was too early to drink hot red wine, the public alcohol consumption with the sausage stands and the Christmas markets is actually quite high, especially around the winter months. I thought that they were just gorgeous. I went to one that was around the foot of one of the cathedrals, and it was selling Christmas toys and memorabilia and stuff. But it was all fair trade. It was all handmade, so you could go down that route if you didn't want to just be suckered into the whole Christmas schlock thing. But that's the new one, or the revamped market at the front of Schönbrunn Palace. I think by like after January, you start thinking, okay, I've seen enough Christmas markets. But in the lead up to it, with a little bit of snow in the air, a lot of Viennese, just Austrians, just say, oh, I'll meet you down there for a drink this afternoon. Have a little mug of hot wine, or you might eat some strudel or something like that. Then you go for an ice skate in front of the town hall, which is also a great way to exercise too, which I did. What a beautiful way to spend a winter, drinking warm drinks and hot chocolates laden with cream and ice skating in front of a town hall. If that doesn't say Christmas to me,
I'll take the mulled wine and the Christmas market. So who else is it? So who do you think the picture we're painting is, that it's for a couples market, or even maybe with older children? But what do you think about who this destination, who's Vienna really targeted at? And what did you feel about who it would be best targeted at?
of course, couples will, especially those who do love history, will completely adore Vienna. That pretty much goes without saying. But I think that, especially at this time of year, I was trucking teens of various ages with me on this one, from the youngest at 13 to the oldest at 19. And I have to say that it really fit in with what they wanted to do. The Instagram-tastic one was taking photos in the absolutely glorious libraries, these incredible libraries that in Vienna that just make beautiful backdrops. The older one was an absolute demon on the ice skating rinks. They were just all over it. And it's a real teen scene as well, because you see all of the kids go and hang out at the skating rinks. And maybe they might be practicing their vaping or meeting up with a boyfriend that they're not supposed to be having. So you see that whole side of Vienna. It really is a lifestyle thing. Sometimes you feel that you go into these cities and you're doing only tourist things. But I think it does bring people right into the cities. So it absolutely works for older kids. And then for younger kids, I think that Christmas scene was really targeted. Some of that stuff was really targeted at very young children. And you'd see couples out with their families just enjoying those Christmas markets. So I think that they cut across all of those sorts of age groups. But then Vienna has some really fantastic flea markets that run on Sunday mornings, and you'd see people just picking through hunting for 1930s German pottery and things like that. And then I took kids down there and they were all trying on the gigantic fur coats, because there's just so many fur coats. They have a really big vintage shopping scene going on there, and you can pick up a fur coat, a real fur coat, for a fistful of euros, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, amazing.
Lots of dress ups going on there. I think you can make it really fun, because one of the things about Vienna is it really has, it sounds so dry saying there's museums everywhere, but seriously, there are museums for it. What do you want a museum about? Do you want one about snow globes? Would you want a museum about ceramics? Do you want a museum about royal carriages or all of the royals or military history? It's pick something and it's pretty much you can take a deep dive into that.
Another question I have for you is, what about some other things that you can do, amazing things that are really close to the city? You already did talk, obviously, about going to Salzburg, but what about some other things that you can do that are really close, and because the transport system's so good?
The great thing about Vienna, like I was saying, was 2.5 hours to Salzburg, is if you if you were a bit of a country ticker, this is really a base to put yourself into. And by that, about how many countries have you visited? Because on an hour's train ride, you can go to Bratislava, which is the next capital across in Slovakia. It's only 1 hour by train. It's actually really popular as a thing to do on a day trip on the weekends. And it's really cheap to get there. It's about €14 to jump on a train to go to Bratislava for the day. And that's really stepping deeper into Eastern Europe, because Vienna really feels like it's Central Europe, and sometimes it lifts its skirt and you think it really is in the East as opposed to being Western facing. It looks both ways in that sense. So 1 hour takes you to Bratislava, 2.5 hours, and you can be in Budapest. And the other great thing about Vienna is it is a base for two of the biggest European low-cost carriers, and that's Ryanair, which is the Irish carrier, and Wizz Air, which is actually based out of Hungary. So they've both got hubs in Vienna. So it's incredible. You can be in Paris or London in a couple of hours, or if you did the slow trains, you can do a night train to Paris. It's about a 10-hour trip to Paris for the night. So you're really connected up to the city. And I had a Eurail pass while I was there. I wouldn't suggest you use it to waste your travel day on a 1 hour trip to Bratislava. You can actually do those overnight trips to as far as Paris, or if you're going up to Scandinavia on the long haul ones, or across further into Eastern Europe, into Romania and Hungary. It's a really incredible location for that sort of European exploration.
It certainly sounds, and it certainly looked on your Insta feeds really beautiful, and made me want to be there, even though I was sitting here sweltering in 35 degrees, which is maybe why it made me want to come. Watching you sitting in the train with those beautiful snow-peaked mountains as your backdrop. And we will put a link in the show notes to all of the tourism sites so you can start planning your own getaway.
Our tip this week is about how best to enjoy the cherry blossom or sakura season without the crowds. Japan is best famous for this gorgeous swathe of sweet-smelling pink blossoms, and which start in a wave from southern Japan and continue up to the most northerly tip of the country.
Yeah, and they look absolutely spectacular. And a common thing to do is called hanami, where you picnic on pink delicacies beneath those stunning blossoms, welcoming in the spring. And there are really famous sites throughout Tokyo and Kyoto to do it. But unfortunately, because they're so beautiful, The blossoms have become a bit of a hit on social media, and what was once peaceful picnic sites are now overrun with visitors, both international and Japanese.
Yeah, Japan's popularity in the last few years has led to authorities there trying desperately to redirect travellers due to what's now a real problem with over-tourism, not to mention the fact that prices hike in transport and accommodation around this peak season. The Japanese Tourism Board actually even suggests heading out of the hotspots of Tokyo and Kyoto and following the trail north, even as far as Sapporo, Japan's most northerly city. And this year, the blossoms are expected to arrive from April the 25th, which is a very precise forecast, isn't it?
That is a very precise date. Yes, April 25. Make sure you plan your trip to that exact date. But alternatively, instead of heading to the busiest places in Japan, where unfortunately it's become so over touristed because Japan generally has, but obviously in this blossom season because it's so spectacular, why not head to South Korea? Because a lot of people might not realize that actually the cherry trees are really common throughout the Korean peninsula. So you get that same beautiful blossoms that throughout the southern coastal city of Jinhae, near Busan, which has an annual festival. And otherwise, Korea's honeymoon island, Jeju, has its own particular strain of cherry blossoms, which are actually bigger and bloom earlier than the rest of the country too. So that's something else to think about.
I did not know that about Jeju, that it has these bigger blossoms. I think that's a selling point for it in its own right. Also, just remember that sakura are not the only flowers to admire during spring in Japan. You can follow the opening of the plum blossoms, umi, at the start of spring, which is about now between mid-February and mid-March, or instead, time your visit for Japan's golden leaf ball in autumn.
Yes, and I have done that. I went to Shikoku Island and the Ia Valley, and oh my gosh, the autumn leaf colours there. There's some incredible, beautiful hues of orange and deep crimson, stunning. And leaf peeping is also hugely popular in places like New England and New York State in the US in September and October, and here in Australia in the Southern Highlands and Victoria's High Country. And also don't miss the autumn display in my homeland in the Otago region of New Zealand, especially around the historic gold mining town of Arrowtown, which is just like something out of a fairy tale at that time of year.
But if you are heading to Japan in the coming months, you can follow the cherry blossom blooming season online at japan-guide.com, and we'll put a link to that in the show notes.
If you'd like to help support our production costs, you can buy us a coffee at coffee.com/theworldawaits. That's ko-fi.com/theworldawaits, so we can continue to bring you inspirational travel interviews with the world's best. Next week, we're talking to Lucy Barnard, an Aussie in pursuit of becoming the first woman to walk the length of the Earth from Argentina to Alaska, crossing 30,000 kilometres and 14 countries. Lucy talks to us about her favourite places to hike and what it's like walking through regions where you need a police escort.
Oh my goodness, I cannot wait to hear about her remarkable journey. And please give us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. Click on our profile, scroll down to the bottom to ratings and reviews. And if you're on Spotify, go to our main page and click the 3 dots underneath the photo. Or simply drop us a line at hello@theworldawaits.au. We love nothing more than hearing from our listeners.
That's a wrap for The World Awaits this week. Click to subscribe anywhere you listen to your favourite pods. And where can people find you, Kirsty?
I'm at Kirsty Wrights on Instagram. That's KIRSTIE Wrights, WRITES. And where can people find you, Belle?
You can find me at globalsalsa.com or on Insta at global_salsa.
Thanks for listening. See you next week.